Welcome into the midweek mailbag show presented to you by Fantasy Points. My name is Nick Skrip. I am your host on this show every single week where I take questions from our community Discord, the Fantasy Points subscribers, and through Twitter and answer them here. So today we have one question from Twitter, the rest from our Fantasy Points Discord. If you are not a subscriber, that's a huge incentive to be a subscriber, is to be part of that Discord, which is awesome. There's all these different channels. The Fantasy Points staff members, along with the subscribers, interact on a daily basis covering different topics. But on this show here today, some great questions. Obviously, we had the trade deadline on Wednesday. Some stuff happened there. We have people all over the place in their fantasy football leagues doing great, doing poorly, and everywhere in between. My one piece of advice is there's a lot of football left. Don't throw in that towel just yet. A lot of questions to be answered here, and I look forward to this show. So let's kick things off with the first question here from Twitter. At Vikings Mourner asks, dropped Tony because of lots of other wide receivers on KC and picked up Jay Palmer. Was this wise to do? So he's pretty much saying he dropped Kadarius Toney, who is now in Kansas City. He feels like there's too many wide receivers there. Picked up Joshua Palmer, which may be more situational with the Chargers. Was this good to do? So I like questions like this because I feel like we can talk about bigger picture things through an example like this. So this to me is a situational drop or add here. And I feel like, due to where you are at in your league, that's how it gets determined if this was a good or bad choice at the end of the day. I think this is the right move if you are not doing well in your league and you need to roster someone you can actually play right away. I am in a league right now where every single win counts for me because I'm a bit behind, and I'm also struggling with wide receiver depth just due to injuries and maybe not drafting the best of guys there. So in this specific situation, I might look and say, hey, Mike Williams is set to miss time. Joshua Palmer is set to return. He was out with a concussion the last game that they played. He has had 13, 15.9, and 14.7 fantasy point weeks this season. Those are flex-worthy scores, similar to when he was given opportunities last year in this offense. So Joshua Palmer, 12 targets in the last game he played. He can be a big factor in lineups right now. On the flip side, if I'm comfortable with my wide receiver depth and how my team is currently performing this year, maybe I don't need to have this immediate play with Joshua Palmer, and I can have some patience with Kadarius Toney. Joshua Palmer, you can say, is going to be a good play since the Chargers did not make any trades for wide receiver with Mike Williams out, but later down the road, maybe he loses out on some snaps and targets. Whereas on the flip side, Kadarius Toney, the Chiefs went and sent a third-round compensatory pick and a 2023 sixth-round pick. There was an investment made there. You don't make that move without factoring in Kadarius Toney into your offense at some point. The question marks are going to be, will he take time to learn the playbook? Will he take time to get connected with Patrick Mahomes? So I feel like, Andy Reid said on Monday that Kadarius Toney is healthy right now. So maybe that factor, that's not a factor in his, returning to action as far as health goes and actually jumping into this Kansas City offense. But there just might be a little bit more, needing of a patient play with Kadarius Toney versus Joshua Palmer. So again, the bigger picture here is a lot of these questions sometimes of your roster moves are situational. Like, do I make this move because I really need a wide receiver to play for the next 3 weeks? Or am I deep enough to say, hey, I don't really need either one of these guys to be in my lineups for the next 3 weeks. Let's see how Kadarius Toney, who the Chiefs made an investment for, looks in this offense. We know that he was a first-round draft pick with a different coaching staff in New York. We've seen what he could do with the ball in his hands. And he makes guys miss. You can say all these nice things about Toney, but you might need a little bit of patience before he actually is performing for a fantasy return. So situational play right there. I can see either route, Palmer or having patience with Toney right there. Pros and cons to, short-term and long-term returns in your fantasy lineups. So the next question here, is from Discord. The rest are going to be from Discord. Josh Coons 84, is KW3 a sell high with a brutal schedule ahead? So is Kenneth Walker, running back for Seattle, is he a sell high right now because Josh Coons feels that it's a brutal schedule ahead? So let's take a look at the games he has been the feature back in and where those defenses currently rank in points per game given up to the running back position. So has he played already good defenses, bad defense? Let's take a look. So he had 14.8 versus the Saints. That was the game that Rashad Penny was injured in. The Saints are 26th in points per game given up to running backs. So 26 out of all of the NFL teams, that's a tough matchup right there. 14.8, he didn't even play that whole game. 19 fantasy points versus Arizona, who currently are 19th in points per game given up to running backs. So that's another tough matchup, and he had 19 fantasy points in that one. 29.7 versus the Chargers. They give up the second most points per game to running backs, so that's more of an expected outcome for any running back, let alone Kenneth Walker. And then this past week, 12.2 fantasy points versus the Giants, who are 27th in points per game to running backs. So that's a tougher matchup. It's not the greatest of fantasy weeks, but that didn't kill you necessarily. So I feel like he's already played against some decent matchups so far. There are some tougher games ahead on the schedule for KW3, but he has shown the ability to produce even against those tougher opponents in those tighter matchups. Volume helps with his floor, 24, 23, and 19 total touches in the first 3 full games he played for the Seahawks. Being able to find the end zone helps as well. 5 touchdowns in his last 4 games with him scoring in all of those games. So you may not be able to count on touchdowns to say, stay consistent. But the volume and the way that Geno Smith is leading this offense, looks to be something that is pretty consistent when it comes to, Kenneth Walker. So unless you're stacked at running back and somebody's overpaying with like a quality wide receiver and you're not deep there, I'd probably just hold right now because the volume's there. The offense actually looks pretty good. He's performed against bad matchups for fantasy running backs. Again, if you're stacked at running backs and somebody really, really likes Kenneth Walker, he's the shiny rookie toy that's going off right now. Maybe that's when you say, hey, I got 3 guys that are solidified studs right now. I really need a better wide receiver option. Then I can do that 1-for-1 and get a good return back for him. So otherwise, I'd probably hold and not worry too much about the matchups there. Nori 1, what do you think about picking up Mike Thomas off of the waiver wire? Can he benefit significantly with Jamar Chase out? So 6 targets for T. Higgins. This was on Monday versus Cleveland. 5 for Tyler Boyd. 4 for Hayden Hurst. 3 for Trenton Irwin. Mike Thomas did have a target, but only saw 45% of the snaps. Maybe more of a bigger picture answer here, but sometimes it's the other guys getting the bump versus the next man up, meaning the guys that were already part of that offense get a bump with one of the main pieces of the offense out versus like, hey, this guy wasn't getting anything. Now, he's the next guy up to get some work. So Boyd has had 2 games of 7+ targets this season. Hayden Hurst has had 4 games of 7+ targets this season. So I feel like with Jamar Chase out, it was a bit of a down week in Cleveland for most of these guys, but I feel like there's a bigger chance at Tyler Boyd and or Hayden Hurst getting a higher target ceiling versus like someone like Mike Thomas stepping into fantasy relevance. So I'd look for a bigger boost in Tyler Boyd, a bigger boost in Hayden Hurst versus like, hey, let's go pick up Mike Thomas now because he's going to get 5 targets every single week. So that's the route I'd kind of look at this sort of situation here. Tecmo Bowl is the next question. Better PPR option rest of season, Amon-Ra or Debo. So Amon-Ra St. Brown for the Lions or Debo Samuel from the 49ers. So Debo has had a hamstring issue, so he did not play in week 8. Hoping that missing this game on top of week 9 being a bye for the San Francisco 49ers will mean that he'll be back on the field in week 10. Debo right now is averaging 14.4 points per game, fantasy points per game. That's PPR, points per reception leagues on the year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 15.7. So both good marks there, leaning in Amon-Ra St. Brown's favor. Debo has had the upside of rushing, which is a factor that led to his success last season for the fantasy world. He started off hot, though, with 8 carries in week 1. Then he had 4 and then 5 the next 2 games. Then went 4 straight weeks with 2 or less. I actually think Christian McCaffrey's presence probably limits that. So he hasn't actually been running the ball a ton. Debo is averaging 7.7 targets per game. St. Brown, 8.3. So again, in St. Brown's favor. 1 game of 10 or more targets for Debo, 3 games of 10 or more targets for St. Brown. Debo has the likes of Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. St. Brown just lost Hawkinson, TJ Hawkinson, his tight end via trade. On paper, the competition for targets is much different. I mean, DJ Chark's on the IR. Khalif Raymond's been stepping up. We know that DeAndre Swift can catch passes well, but he's still a little bit banged up. Jameson Williams will be a factor at some point, but as of like right now today, target competition is much different in the favor of St. Brown yet again. So big play upside with the ball in his hands for Debo, but give me St. Brown, who we have seen be hyper targeted and should continue to be hyper targeted in that Detroit Lions offense. Next question here. ETN phone end zone. Do you worry at all about young running backs like ETN? So he's going with the username straight into the player there. Again, do you worry about at all about young running backs like ETN fizzling out late or getting hurt if they continue to see such heavy usage? So Travis Etienne just saw a season high 27 touches this past week. 16 was his high before that. So it's not like he was getting, that work consistently for the last X amount of weeks. But I mentioned Ken Walker earlier and his volume on the show. And it's been high the last 3 games for him specifically. Here's some examples, though, of some big workloads in the second half of seasons for some rookies in the past. So 2017, Ezekiel Elliott had a good rookie season. He saw 19 touches in all of his final 8 full games played. He might have been injured, though, in that last game of the season. Barkley in 2018, Saquon Barkley, 20-plus touches in 6 out of 8 of his final games that year. 2020, Jonathan Taylor had a minimum of 18 and a high of 31 touches in his final 4 games. So both Etienne and Kenneth Walker were players that gradually stepped into more volume. Etienne had Robinson taking work. Walker had to get healthy, and then he had Penny still in the mix. I wouldn't be too concerned about that. More touches equals more of an opportunity for injury, but that goes for like all players at all positions, of all ages in the league. These guys, these rookies, have had training camp, preseason, 8 weeks of NFL action to get their bodies to adapt to the league. I know Ken Walker had to get healthy, but again, we've seen rookie running backs in the past get some heavier work in the second half of the season. And, of course, people are going to get banged up, but I wouldn't be concerned about that heavy usage because it's not really something that's completely new. Last question, Arthur Normandy, Fields or Carr? So it's wild to look at this the difference in situations here, and this even be a question because prior to the Chase Claypool news, you had Justin Fields with Darnell Mooney, Equanimous St. Brown, that's the older brother of the good St. Brown, N'Keal Harry, Byron Pringle, Dante Pettis, Cole Kmet. I'm just like naming names here. Velus Jones Jr., can't forget about the veteran rookie. Versus Derek Carr with Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller. Matt Collins has even looked better than most of the Bears core outside of, he's actually had some pretty good games. Maybe you could say Mooney's been stepping it up, but even Matt Collins has had some pretty good games. But Carr through 8 weeks is averaging 14.65 fantasy points. Fields, 16.05, even with that difference of receiving cores there. During the span, Fields has been hot. So weeks 5 through 8, Fields has been the QB2 overall, averaging 21.71 fantasy points versus Carr during that stretch, being the QB30, averaging 11.47, 88, 82, and 60 rushing yards the last 3 games for Fields. Gives him a fantasy floor that I'm more comfortable with than Derek Carr seeing his struggles. So I'm sticking with Fields here. new wide receiver added maybe can give him a bump in the passing attempts. Obviously, that comes from the coaching staff and the playbook, but bringing in Chase Claypool to add with Darnell Mooney, maybe that just increases the amount of throwing that Fields is actually allowed to do in Chicago. But um, I'm just happy, in all honesty, as a Bears fan, as a Fields fan, that he has a second option now after having arguably the worst wide receiver room in the NFL. So give me Justin Fields just based off of what we've seen lately. Justin Fields, people said Bill Belichick is going to shut him down because he knows how to do that to players. That was 2 weeks ago. And then they said, Dallas Cowboys, too tough of a defense. He's going to have a down week. And he's been solid for fantasy back-to-back weeks and two tough matchups. So seeing that for Justin Fields, see him be efficient on the ground, see him just get a new weapon. I'm for Justin Fields over Derek Carr. And I'm actually for Justin Fields being a true thought for being a top 12 quarterback rest of the season. Maybe he's more in that 10 to 12 range, but still seeing what he's done the last handful of weeks, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's a 4-game stretch of being the second best quarterback during it. I'm going with Justin Fields. No Chicago Bears bias there. But thank you guys for tuning into this show. Again, if you want to have your questions featured on this show, I talk about that every week. How to get that done. You can ask them on the Fantasy Points Media Group Twitter page. I believe it's Fantasy Points, Fantasy PTS Live. If you go to that, we ask on there every week for questions. Or if you are a Fantasy Points subscriber, you can ask. I at everybody on Mondays, usually around noon, and ask for questions. You can go ask questions through there. If you're not a subscriber, get in there so you can be part of that action and the rest of the stuff going on in the Discord there. So good luck to you guys in week 9. Hopefully we can pull some dubs together, and hopefully you guys got something out of this show.